Hello everybody, I am Councillor Eden for Division 5, including the city, and it's my absolute honour to do the acknowledgement to country today. I'd like to acknowledge the people and the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet, the Wallaby, Yidinji and Yirrkala people, and pay my respects to both their elders past, present and emerging, and of course extend that acknowledgement and respect to anyone who's present here today. I missed the introduction, so I hope I'm not going to be too repetitive, but it's fantastic to have a local author here in our library. I believe he went to Trinity Bay State High School.
I sure did, yeah.
I'm on the school council there, my daughter goes there.
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
Sister's the hot of English there.
Oh,
so this is really great. I look forward to letting my sister know. So obviously you live in Cairns, you went to Trinity Bay, you worked in tourism, so I'm thinking you're pretty glad that you're now an established author and not in the tourism industry. It's been a pretty hard slog for our tourism industry. And you've studied at JCU?
Yep, James Cook University and then down at University of Queensland.
Yeah. And you're here today to tell us all about your book?
Yeah. Which is set here in the tropics, so.
Fantastic. Without further ado, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Averil Kenny and this is my first novel, Those Hamilton Sisters, which was published by Echo Publishing just the end of March. So it's an April release, just in time for Mother's Day, which was really exciting. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Well, actually, I'll tell you about the book first. It's a coming-of-age tale. It's women's fiction. It's a story about three orphan sisters who've returned in the 1950s to their outcast mother's birthplace. So it's a small town, a fictional town called Vale, which is set just south of Cairns. And the girls have come home to the care of their auntie. So then we follow their growing up between 1955 and 1965. It's an epic, sweeping story. It's also a story of women overcoming, and it's a story most of all about sisterhood. So I'll tell you a bit about myself. First of all, I've been a Cairns local since 1987. I moved up here with my family when I was 8 years old. I was born down in Narooma, New South Wales. So very different landscape and setting. I was a farm girl. I lived on a dairy farm for those first 8 years of my life with grandparents just over the hill, and it was a rolling green dairy farm overlooking the sea. And we didn't have a television. We had a little old farmhouse that my grandparents lived in, and my grandfather had built my parents' house. No television. I just had a room full of books. So I read all the time while walking around the dairy farm, just looking at the beautiful surroundings. And it's always been for me, imagination and surroundings, landscape are linked, and just that love of reading. I was an early reader. So I started the first book I fell in love with was The Faraway Tree, Magic Faraway Tree with Enid Blyton. And I actually have a very distinct memory. My mum, in later years when we lived down there, was the florist. So Narooma is a small town, it's a fishing town with dairy and lots of farms around. And my mum was the small town florist. So she used to take us up to Sydney to the flower markets. And I remember sitting in the back of the car, and I had The Faraway Tree on my lap, all my Enid Blyton hardcover books. And I just remember thinking, this is it, I have to be an author. I have to have a book like this, and I have to write books. And I was only 5, and it was just, I wanted to be a mother always, but I just knew I have to be an author. No matter what, I have to write a book. So that's been there for me throughout everything, all through school. I'd be sitting there make-believing that I was at university learning to be a writer, or I was writing a book instead of an English assignment. And when we moved up to Cairns, so we left the dairy farm and came up to Cairns. And actually before we left, my teacher said, "Oh, you're going to Cairns." Crocodiles everywhere. There's just crocodiles. And I was this 8-year-old child just thinking, oh my goodness, that's all I knew of Cairns. And then when we arrived here, it was hot. We got off the plane, and it was that we thought, oh, it's so hot. It's the jet engine. It's just so hot. We'll get away from the plane and it won't be so hot. And that never stopped. It's never stopped being so hot. And it was just walking into this, I say it's an enchanted place. Everything about it is otherworldly. It's the plants and the trees and the creatures, and everything about this place is otherworldly. And I, as a child, fell in love with it. I just, going from such a different place to coming up here and the wildness and the danger and the excitement. And I think that's really set the stage for me with my first novel, and with my writing, that sense of trying to capture someone who's arrived in a place that is so magnificent and so different, and how that impacts every aspect of your lives. You know, it's just a part, it's how you live is so influenced by the weather and the landscape. So when we first moved to Cairns, my parents went into tourism. So I also had that experience of, my dad was a coach driver, and my mum was working full time all the time, and so on the weekends she'd put us on the coach with dad, and he'd go off to do a day tour, and we'd be sitting in the coach, and we thought that was great because we were the coach driver's children, and my brother would be wearing the little coach driver mini uniform, and we'd travel all around up to the Daintree and down to Paranella Park and up to the Tablelands. And I'd be sitting up the back of the coach, and I'd hear my dad just giving all the commentary, and he'd be describing what we were seeing, and he would be giving all these amazing stories, and he loved nature books, and he loved anything that gave him an insight into the local area. So I always would be sitting there myself with my mind running off to imaginings and things I wanted to write, while my dad's voice would be there guiding me through the local area. So I think that's had a huge impact as well for me. Storytelling is so entwined with the landscape and where we live here. I wrote from very early age. I was always scribbling, always leaving notes and notebooks and stories around everywhere. My first novel I started writing in high school, and I finished that when I was in university at James Cook University. I was doing teaching because I thought, well, if I become a teacher, I'll have lots of time to write. So obviously I've grown up and learnt that's not the case. But I wrote my first novel while I was at university, and it's not a publishable novel. The only person who's ever read that novel to this day is my husband. And then I went off to University of Queensland and did journalism. So I thought, well, if I can get skills, actual writing skills, that will help me. And I really actually secretly just wanted to do the creative writing course that they offered as part of the journalism degree. So that got me one step closer to doing creative writing. So I really enjoyed my time down at University of Queensland, and being away from Cairns only made me love the place more. And when we did our creative writing course as part of the degree, I remember writing my short story about cyclones, and I still have that short story. In fact, there is a description in my novel that's still from that short story that I wrote at uni, because I could never escape how much I loved it. And we studied books that were set up in the north as part of literature courses at uni, and I just felt so almost defensive of it. That's my far north, and I should be able to talk about it to everyone. So I love this place. When I came back to Cairns, I continued to work in tourism. So I've done everything from, I started as a reservations clerk when I was 12. I did day tour hostessing. I've worked in operations and all the dispatching of coaches and so forth. So I've worked from a very young age. That was through my family and through my uncles, which was at Downlander Tours. So that's just in my lifeblood, really. And then I first fell pregnant in 2005 and had my first baby, and that's when this book was born too. So we were living in Freshwater at the time, and we'd be, after work each day, we'd go to walk through the sugarcane fields there in Freshwater, and the sun would be setting with this just magnificent light that comes across the top of the cane, and we'd be walking through, and that's when this first idea of this family living in a sugarcane region was born. And the end of the story actually came to me first. So the end was in the beginning. I knew how the story would end. I knew the place that it would finish up. I also saw the final scene. And then I proceeded to have another 2 children. So I had 3 children in 4 years. And that was an all-consuming endeavour. And then when my littlest, my then 3rd child, was a newborn baby, I was just sitting there one day holding her against my chest, and I opened up a hardcover journal, and I just wrote out the first chapter of this book, and it flowed out of me. I'd had the ideas there, but it just absolutely flowed out of me, and that chapter remains pretty much unchanged to this day, the first line is still the same. So after that I thought, well, I know my story now. I had the idea of this beautiful red-headed heroine named Esther, and she was a mother, and she just seemed to come to me and say, these are my daughters, can you take care of them for me? So from there the story was born, and these characters just sprang to life. And then for the next about 7 years I would write the story whenever inspiration struck. So in between, I then had another child, so I've got 4 children, and it would be, you know, around the children, and I'd have miscarriages and pregnancy and anxiety. I had postnatal anxiety, so a lot of things happened, and that's definitely shaped this story as well. That's been part of the emotional richness, I suppose, to the story and some of the characters' complexities. And I wrote for another 7 years. I got to about 2017, and it was ready to go out to beta readers, so my first early readers. My first reader is always my husband. My book goes out to him first. So then I went to beta readers, and I decided, well, I'll try the what they call the slush piles. So they're the, you send your manuscript away and to the publisher unrepresented, and just, I guess, try your luck. You don't often hear a lot. So I tried a couple of those and didn't hear anything, didn't get any feedback or anything, and I thought, well, you know, if it had any merit, I'm sure it'd be picked up, it'd be published. And I felt quite despondent about that, but I absolutely believe in this story so much. It's got my whole heart in it. So I thought, I'm going to self-publish my book. And I was approaching my 40th birthday, and I thought, well, I'd made up my mind I was going to be published by my 20th birthday and then my 30th birthday, and I'd made up my mind I would publish by my 40th. So I thought, well, I'll self-publish. And if my story has any merit, if people love it, then it will take off in its own way. I just really wanted to put it out into the world. No matter what, I just wanted my book out there. So I started the process towards self-publishing. So the first step was getting an editor. I really felt that for the book to be the most polished it could be, even if only 50 people read it, I wanted it to be in the best shape it could be. I'd done so much work on it, reducing it down from a very large bloated manuscript, because I would just write when inspiration struck, and I really let the girls in my story take the lead. And so the story itself had just got so large, and I needed to cut it down, really bring it down to a smaller shape, so it wasn't quite so epic. It's still epic, but not quite so epic. And so I organised to have it edited by a freelance editor. I had to wait quite a few months because she's an absolutely brilliant editor. Her name's Alex Nalis. And so I waited, and in the meantime was looking at covers and all those kind of things that I had to hand over to experts. I can't do any of those things. And when my manuscript actually came back from my editor, the whole picture had changed. So where I thought, well, I'll self-publish and give my best offering to the world, it was actually a case of my editor suggesting that I could try traditional publishing. She was able to guide me there, first of all with her excellent editing of my book, and then guiding me towards looking at literary agents. And I was introduced to Selwa Anthony. So she's just the most wonderful woman, very long legacy in the publishing industry here in Australia. I was able to send my manuscript off to Selwa and couldn't believe it when she accepted it. I was jumping up and down, banging my head on the ceiling. It was just the most exciting moment for me. And then we worked together just making sure we were both happy with the book. And then it went off out to publishers. So I was very, very lucky to be picked up by Echo Publishing Australia. So they're a fantastic little publisher. They're actually come under Bonnier UK. So I've been very fortunate that I've been published end of March here, and I'll also be published in UK in August. So that was very exciting for my first book to go UK as well as Australia. So working with the team at Echo has just been brilliant. I've spent the pandemic year polishing up my manuscript again. My publisher, Tegan Morrison, had some beautiful vision for the novel, so we brought the novel to this state together, and I'm just so proud of it, really, really proud of it. So it's a story about 3 girls. You can see on the front they've all got a shade of red hair. So that was really important to me because the mother, Esther, is this fiery red-haired young woman who'd left the town under a cloud of shame 20 years earlier. And her daughters, when they arrive back, they come in on a steam train on the platform in 1955, and they are all in some way a version of their mother. And that's reflected in, we've got Sonnet, who is the eldest, and she's now the guardian of the younger girls. So Sonnet has the fiery red hair of her mother. She's a very strong character, and she very much takes the lead in the novel. Then we've got the middle girl, which is Fable, and she's got a strawberry blonde hair. And then the youngest, who here on the cover is an older grown-up girl, but when she arrives, she's only a little 3-year-old orphan. So the 3 daughters step down onto the platform, and they're going to have to settle into town, but not knowing that there's a huge scandal in the town involving their mother, and it's the reason she left, and that's something that's going to hang over all their lives, unbeknownst to them upon their arrival. And the town of Noavale itself is based the Vale, it's a valley itself. It's based on where I live. It's based on all the parts that I love here in far north Queensland. So when you read the novel, if you're a long-time local, I think you'll recognise a lot of things, and I hope that will give you delight to see little things that, oh, I know where that house, I've seen that house in town, I know where that is. And obviously it's very fictionalised and it's only inspiration, but I hope there's a few little things I've dropped in that you'll recognise the names and you say, oh, okay, she's used that. I've set it south of Cairns, but it's, you know, where I grew up, I went to school at Trinity Bay High School and we lived out at Redhead. And when it flooded, we would actually be sent home from school on a bus and we'd all be piled into the bus like sardines, and you'd be like this on the way home to cross the bridge before it went over. So, you know, I've had that experience growing up of the cyclone coming and the rushing home when it would start to flood too much. And that's what this little vale is like. Noah Vale's like that. It's in the name, Noah Vale. It's just bridges going under all the time. So I set the novel in 1955. I grew up here in the 80s. So for me, I had to go back and look at what the experience was like. Very similar in that the landscape hasn't changed and the weather hadn't changed too much, but obviously different attitudes and a much different life. So my two grandmothers were women in the 50s, raising families. My husband's grandmothers were raising families in the 50s. So that was wonderful to start from the place of what it was like for those strong women in my life and all the stories they would always tell me about raising children, and all the, so my mother and my husband's mother and father-in-law, and what it was like for them back in that era. So something that was very wonderful for me was that my grandparents and my husband's auntie had all written down memories. So I was able to draw on the inspiration of people who had lived through those times. My husband's family actually, his grandmother Enid, which is a nice little thing, she was actually on her library card member #1 at the Stratford Library. So they grew up in the region there. So I think that was 1959 it might have opened, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, she was member #1 and she was in the tennis club there. I think she was instrumental in that opening, and she was joined the CWA when the CWA hall opened there in about 1955, I believe. So there was a lot of those aspects that were really special for me to include in the novel from that era. So the novel itself is, you know, it's set in the 50s, and the story belongs in the 50s because of what the girls go through and the issues that they deal with. When I was writing this novel, however, I started writing it 15 years ago, and these were events that came from my imagination and the experiences that the girls led me through, because I wasn't a plotter, I was very much led by the girls and their experiences. But what's actually turned out to be quite unusual is the fact that in the media right now, there's a lot of the things that are in this novel we're still dealing with as women in this current generation. So I found that quite remarkable, really, that a lot of the things that were issues for women and that my mother's generation talked about, and you know, things that would be said in a half whisper and swept under the rug, and just the sense that women had that he would get away with it and she didn't. And it feels like that's still current today, unfortunately. So my characters are dealing with it in a different setting, but I've tried to write a novel which is uplifting. So this is a story about women overcoming, then this is a story about women finishing their own story and telling their own story. So with my novel, I obviously had to fit it around children, and so I have a laptop and I would go wherever I needed to write. When the children were younger, I'd have a child strapped to my chest in a little baby sling, and I'd be writing standing up while whopping, trying to keep him asleep. Then I would put my laptop in my bike and go for a ride, or I often came to the library. So I actually have a really special memory to me of one day coming here to write, and I was sitting down the back, and it was a fable chapter. So that's my beautiful middle daughter, and I didn't know what she was doing that day. I really would let the girls lead a lot, and I remember sitting down there and I just went, I don't know. And I looked outside and I saw these magnificent fig trees, and I just went, oh, okay, I know. And it almost came fully formed into my mind, the scene. And so I stayed as long as I could before having to go and get my youngest then child from daycare, and it just seemed to flow out of me. So I actually have a photo on my Instagram account from that day where I went and took a photo of myself at the stained glass with the beautiful Ulysses butterfly and so forth, and raved about it to my friends about having been at the library and what it felt like to have a bit of time to myself, because my children were, they weren't in daycare a lot. I did most of the caring myself. So that was really special to me. Whenever I read that chapter, I actually then come back to the library. So there's something about when you listen to an audiobook and when you think of it later, you remember where you were when you read a certain part of the story. And my novel, for me, when I think of a part of the novel, I can remember where I was a lot of the time when I was writing it. And often that was out somewhere where I was looking at the very thing that was inspiring me. And so that's something that's really special about living and writing in the area in which you live, is that it's like that. I can just think to where I was at that time. I've kind of run a little bit out of steam now. I'd love to take any questions if there's, yeah, absolutely.
Why the redhead?
Oh, so my favourite book when I was growing up was Anne of Green Gables. And so redhead heroines, I always knew I had to write a redhead heroine. When I was growing up, I was a little blonde girl and I just wanted to have red or auburn hair. That's all I wanted all my life, and my mum had auburn hair, so I wanted red or auburn hair. And I just loved the idea of 3 feisty redhead girls. I really loved that. And the Anne of Green Gables book was first given to me when I was a girl by my nana. And from the little farmhouse, she had these falling down kind of shelves, and she handed me the book. And it was a yellow cover. I'm obsessed with the colour yellow. And I just fell in love with it, read the whole series within a couple of months. And that's had a lasting impact on me, because L.M. Montgomery is a writer who loves she just captures landscape and surroundings so beautifully, and the sunrises and the sunsets, and you always have that feeling in her heroines, that love of nature. And that's something that resonates with me. My heart feels like a physical ache when I look at things that I love, and then I just want to go and write. I'll take a photo just so I feel like I can capture it, but then I just want to go and write. And that's how I am as a writer. I feel that the beauty that I want to show in my own writing. And actually what's really interesting with L.M. Montgomery, when she writes Anne of Green Gables, she's a writer as well. She's an aspiring writer, and her first published piece of work is actually a short story, and it's called Averil's Atonement, spelled A-V-E-R-I-L, like my name. So the first time I ever discovered that, I just wept as a little girl, because she wrote about me. Her first heroine was me. So, yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Do you have a sister, or how did you develop your relationships with the sisters within the book? I don't know, maybe you've got daughters, or how did you get perspective of those relationships?
So I do have a sister.
I come from a family of 3 girls. So.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, so I have a sister. I have one sister and I have one brother. He actually jokes that the joke's on him, because I made mine 3 sisters instead of, so there's 3 in my family. My mum has sisters, and I drew on the relationships as inspiration, but these are their own girls. They took on their own life. And I just feel as women, it's something that it's life, isn't it? It's, it's such a part of life, really. I don't know. It's their own characters, and they're their own relationships, but just drawing on, those relationships with women in my life, and yeah, my mum and her sisters, yeah.
Is it a happy ending?
It is a happy ending. Yeah, I believe in happy endings. Hope that's not spoiling the ending. No, it is a happy ending, yeah, very much so. No, I wanted it to be what they call uplit, or, like uplifting. I don't like a sad, and I also don't like too much of an ambiguous ending as well. I have had people say to me, will you write a sequel? Because when the story ends, obviously we start with Plum, and she's a little 3-year-old when we arrive in Noah Vale. And so when we end, she's just on that cusp of womanhood, where we don't get to see the rest of her story. But I did start writing a sequel to the novel. I probably wrote about 50,000 words, and then I felt I'm not there yet with that character, and I didn't feel like she was speaking to me very strongly. I don't like to feel like I'm moving dolls around in the story. I really need the characters to feel them. I almost feel like I'm stepping into their shoes when I write, and I have to feel like I'm just typing and they're acting. They're working, and it just seems to flow out of me. So, and I wasn't quite there yet with Plum. She still a little bit feels like I'm moving her around and trying to tell her what to do with her life. So I wasn't quite ready for that. But it does have a happy ending, and it does have a satisfying ending. That's something that I hope people have been, they've been saying to me that they feel very satisfied, but it does leave you with that feeling, I miss that family. I'd like to hear more of what happened to the family. Yeah.
How did you deal with having somebody cut large chunks when they were editing of your story down? Is it hard to not to take that personally? Like, how did you think about that?
Well, with the editing, it's always ultimately up to me. So when I first sent it away to my freelance editor before submission, I was advised, I think it was about 18,000 words I had to take out. A huge chunk of it had to do with Plum. So the story was just way too bloated, and she was a lot younger. And the story itself, most of my beta readers wanted to stay with the older girls as they were growing up, and the younger daughter, it didn't interest them as much. So it made sense to take it out. And I'm not precious. I don't, if people say, oh, it'll be better without this, there's that initial feeling like, oh, but I really like that. But then it doesn't worry me at all to take it out. So I actually find it quite addictive, editing. I love the editing. It's a different state completely. My brain seems to flip over to some other state when I'm in the editing process. And I'm much more analytical, and I can't really do editing and writing at the same time. I'll need like a day between them before I can switch between tasks. But I love it. Even when I have to open my manuscript every day and do something and fix something. It's just a really gratifying feeling. I guess for some people, the way housework might be not for me. I don't like to clean, but I love polishing it up. And every time I make any change to the book, I just feel like, oh, that made it so much better. It's a great feeling.
How did you find these beta readers? Because you weren't engaged with you were self-publishing at that time.
So because I've been so busy with children at home, I haven't really been a part of any writers groups or anything, but that's something that's hugely valuable to writers, is being part of writers group, because you'll get that peer critique and you can play ideas off people and so forth. For me, I'm the kind of person, when I was at school, I didn't even like to hand in a first draft. I just wanted to do it all myself and then hand it in at the end. Whereas my children's generation, they do a first draft and the teacher will help them with it. But I've never been like that. So I hold my cards close to my chest, I guess, and I felt like it was a very personal thing. I didn't want to feel like anyone else would ever read it to start with, because I think that gives you a freedom to write and just express yourself. With beta readers, I actually chose my own through people who I had followed largely on social media, so people who I saw daily, and they would post the books that they read, and we were good friends, but I would see pictures of the books that they were reading, and I could look at their reading taste and think, well, that's someone who's got a very wide and varied diet of books. And I chose people who I felt would give me honest feedback, because I like to have my ego stroked, but it's not good for a writer. You need someone who can be really honest and say, this didn't work or that didn't work. And the great thing about having an early group of readers, whether in a writing group or for me, my beta readers, was that you get an overall picture of the book. So you get the same feedback that I was getting from everyone was something that was coming through all the time. And so I'd go, okay, well, if everyone's telling me that, then that's something I need to look at. And it just gives you, a difference. If I hand it to my mum, she loves everything I write, and she thinks everything I love is beautiful, so thanks, Mum. And if I hand it to my husband, he sits down with a red pen and goes through it very, he's a structural engineer, so he's got a different way of looking at things. But the beta readers, it was great to have people who thought very highly of me and who thought highly of my writing, but could also be very honest. And you don't want people that are going to make you feel bad about yourself, but who can give you honest feedback.
I was just going to ask you about your book that wasn't published. So what made that unpublishable?
Oh, the one when I was 19? That I was 19? There's a kernel of truth in that novel. I say there's like a beating heart to every novel, and there's a truth in that novel that will be a future novel, but I'm still waiting for, I feel like I've come of age now and I could actually write that story well. But when I wrote it, I was writing it as a 19-year-old, and I was living at home still at that point and going to university here, and that's a very entitled kind of age, really. Everything was provided for me by my family, and I was going to university and I hadn't had all those lovely hard knocks or was about to go through all those things. But so I feel like I could write it now, but it's probably it's quite, you know, vain really, I guess, those novels at that age. I'm a prolific journal writer, so it was always written in first person, everything I wrote, and that novel's in first person and this is not. And I feel that as I've grown up, I'm able to embody the experience of others much better because of the empathy you develop through being a mother and just through life and through sadness and awful things we go through. But that first novel was written more like a diary. It was I. And that novel, the truth is in it, and it will be a future novel, but it's not publishable. There's some nice little turns of phrase in there, but it's not. Yeah.
So you write a diary every day?
I try to. I do a thing called Morning Pages. I don't know if you've heard of that, by Julia Cameron. It's her idea. She says you should wake up in the morning. It's a great exercise, both spiritually and creatively. You hop up and the first thing you do is you sit down and you write 3 pages. And whatever comes out, you just write. I find that quite a spiritual practice because you're just writing. You're not making it look pretty. It's not for anyone to read, hopefully. It's just whatever's in your mind for the day. And I've resolved a lot of issues that way, a lot of things that were really worrying me, particularly when you start putting yourself out there as an author and you're putting your writing out there and your stories out there. You know, you can have a lot of hang-ups about things. You could, you know, be precious about stuff. But I found just writing out feelings, then I don't need to bother my family as much talking about everything. So, I do keep a journal, but I call it Morning Pages now. So it's not so much yesterday I went and I did da-da-da. It's very self-reflective, and it's also sometimes just about building myself up. So if I go away from something with the cringes, then I can write about it the next morning and kind of let it go. I also get a lot of ideas for my novel that way too, something that's completely unconnected. So I find creativity is a process of flow, and so if I'm writing about something else, an idea will come into my head that's completely unrelated, like there was a program running in the background and it's just sparked, and so then I'll scribble that down. And I have kept a journal throughout the entire creation of this novel, so I can actually look back and see all those big moments in the book. There's a parallel in my journals, which is really quite special.
How did you know when, okay, we're going to publish now, I'm done, I'm dusted, it's good to go out?
I guess the answer to that is that it wasn't ready when I thought it was ready to go to self-publishing. I thought that it was the best I could get it. I'm also someone that would never stop fiddling with it and never stop editing. When I had to do the final read-through of the novel at the start of this year before it went to print, I was almost in a state of panic because I thought, well, this is it. This is the last time I can touch it. And that was quite daunting to think, oh, I can't ever fix anything again. But I think you could always improve a novel, and I believe that if I look back in 10 years' time, there are things that I probably would change about the novel. And I'm sure there's novelists today who've been writing for many decades who would look back and really regret things they've actually written because times change, attitudes change, things change. But the way the novel is now, I didn't think I would feel so complete, but I feel just so proud of it the way it is. So that's, I guess, the best sign. And when you have an amazing editor, you know, the feedback that you get through the editing process, it's not just me, the writer, it's me working with someone who's more skilled than I am at editing, so that's a working process.
Hello everyone. This came out from behind me. Shoving there.
You think we're wrapping up? Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
unless there's any more questions.
All right. Well, thank you to Averil, and give her a round of applause. It's a great achievement. So
thank you.
Yeah, very good. We've got Cairns books here for anyone that would like to purchase a book, and I'm sure Averil would be more than too keen to sign it. So thank you.
Will they be in the library? Oh, here, to borrow.
Yeah, you can buy one there.
And later on, yeah. Yeah, I'll borrow one.
Thank you. Yeah, it was lovely. Nice presentation.